Hello and welcome to Filling the Sink, a podcast from Catalan News. I'm Lorcan Doherty and today we're talking about Catalonia's education system. The PISA international test results published in December were a bit of a disaster. The worst for Catalan students since the tests in reading, maths and science were introduced 2 decades ago. Today we're turning the spotlight on the Catalan education system, asking an education expert and 2 secondary school teachers why Catalonia's PISA results were so bad, and if it's really such a big deal. Joining me today is Oriol Escudé. Good to see you, Oriol.
Hi, Lorcan. Good to have you back.
Yeah, it's good to see you. It's good to be back in the hot seat, I should say. All the best to Lucia, who hosted Filling the Sink for the last few months. She's moved on now to Pastors New. We'll miss her around here. And dear listeners, you're stuck with me now again for a while, I'm afraid. Oriol, just before we started recording, we discovered that today, January 24th, while we're recording here, is International Day of Education.
We didn't do it on purpose.
We didn't even plan this. This is
very
perfect.
Convenient.
As declared by the United Nations General Assembly in 2018, we could not have planned this better. We didn't plan that. But Oriol, the reason we're talking about education today is because of these PISA results, which we've been writing a lot about on Catalan News. Nothing to do with the Leaning Tower. What are these tests all about exactly?
Yeah, nothing to do with Italy. So PISA is the world's most important education test. It stands for Program for International Student Assessment. It began 24 years ago, and it's carried out by the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. What do these tests actually evaluate? So basically, they aim to assess education systems worldwide by testing the skills and knowledge of 15-year-old students in different countries and economies. Every 3 years, a randomly selected group of 15-year-olds take the test in 3 key subjects: reading, maths, and science. The tests are designed to be independent of the curriculum, so we're able to compare different countries. And it's important to mention that the group is selected randomly, regardless of whether they study in a private or a public school.
And as I mentioned, Catalonia didn't do so well this time around.
No, actually, we did pretty bad. Catalan pupils got their worst results in the PISA test history, and a drop equivalent to a whole academic year of study compared to the last test.
Which was just 3 years ago.
Actually 4, because the test was supposed to be taken in 2021, but it was taken in 2022 because of the pandemic.
Yeah, and it's part of it. I mean, Catalonia used to get very good results, I think it's fair to say. No, but we've seen a decline over the last decade.
Yeah, absolutely. We were always within OECD average, and now we're not. We're below it. And if we look at Spain, for example, we see that Spain has managed to stay within OECD average. So Spain didn't do that bad after all. And Catalonia was always on top of the list within the Spanish regions. Now it fell down the list.
Yeah, I suppose one interesting thing is looking at the results from Catalonia, Spain, but also other OECD countries and EU countries. There seemed to be a lot that got worse results this time around.
Yeah, Europe actually suffered an unprecedented decline in the PISA tests, especially Germany, Iceland, the Netherlands, Norway, Poland. Performance in maths, for example, across OECD countries fell by a record 15 points, while reading fell by 10 points. So if we look at OECD countries, they fell by 17 points, and European countries fell by 20 points. That's a similar fall compared to Catalonia. So it wasn't that bad if we look at other EU countries.
So as soon as these results came out, the question everyone was asking here was, well, why is Catalonia doing worse now than it was a few years ago? And one education official here in Catalonia said that the results could partly be explained by an overrepresentation of migrant students in the students that took the test. But the very next day, the government backtracked, and that was clarified and said no, the kind of proportion of migrant students who took the test were representative of Catalan education in general. So there's a bit of political fallout over that. And the government have since said that some of the likely causes for the poor results are child poverty and also school segregation, which is basically the proportion of children at each school from lower economic backgrounds or from immigrant backgrounds should be kind of the same across an area, so in Barcelona or in whatever particular town. Oriol, you've also been looking at other possible reasons behind the low scores.
Yeah, there's been, as you said, a lot of attention on the press, and we've heard experts giving their assessment of what's happened. Now, there's various reasons that could explain it. One of them, very obvious, is the pandemic, COVID. But everyone suffered the pandemic, even in Japan, Singapore, the higher scoring countries have also suffered the pandemic. So they've also talked about migration, as you said, school segregation, child poverty, even cell phones in schools.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe the most obvious to me, it's funding. Catalonia's education has been underfunded for many, many years.
It's interesting you mentioned phones there. We might end up doing a podcast just about phones in classrooms, because that's another kind of very hot topic at the minute. But to find out more about the reasons behind these low scores in the PISA tests, Oriol, you spoke to Mònica Nadal. She's the research director of the Fundació Bofill, an independent education research institution. Here's Mònica.
We've done so poorly in PISA, first of all, because Catalonia has been underinvesting in education for many, many years. I cannot say forever, but at least for the last 15 years or more, we've been spending less money than other countries and other autonomous communities on education. What happened is that at the same time that this was happening, the pupil body has dramatically changed. For the last 20 years, we've been receiving loads of immigration, which isn't a problem in itself. It shouldn't be a problem. If you have the policies, you need to address those children. You have to make sure that you have robust, strong policies that take these children, teach them fast and quickly the skills to be able to communicate and to learn in the new language. And you do it as quickly as you can and as solidly as you can, and you put the best teachers to train them or to teach them so that they can catch up and follow their peers. School segregation has to be reduced, clearly. It's not the only problem, but it is one problem. What you find in the schools is that poor kids, migrant kids, tend to go to the same schools, and those kids that belong to wealthier families go to other schools. And we have to make sure that each school in the country reflects the reality of the demographics of the people that live in the village. An education system measures its quality on the ability to provide good education to those kids that only have schools to get it. Because those kids are the ones who need education most, that need a school that works most. If you don't provide education to them, you are failing. Educating, as I say, middle or upper class kids it is complicated, but it's not as difficult. It's not as challenging as providing the same level of education to poor kids. So both of them are excuses. An acknowledgement that we don't have the policies that we need to face the reality that we have. So COVID is partially to blame, but it could have been also addressed. We made some recommendations to the Department of Education, and one of them is, okay, go and identify those kids that have been suffering the most. Some kids have suffered a lot because they've been 3-4 months at home. In the homes, the parents were either working as essential workers, or they had been living in conditions of certain poverty, or no one was there to help them out. So yes, COVID had an effect, but it could have been addressed, but it is not the cause. It would be too easy. We were, as I was saying, we had a history at least of 15 years in which the results were mediocre, the resources weren't there, the policies weren't robust. From 2010, after massive cuts in education, teacher training and development was almost left to zero. So the whole system had been weakened. And as I said, well, when you are weak, then the first virus that passes, it just puts you to bed.
That was Mònica Nadal, the research director at the Fundació Bofill. thanks very much to her. A very interesting chat you had with her, Oriol.
Yeah, absolutely. I really enjoyed talking to her. It was very nice to hear from an expert. And I thought, that there could be one reason or two reasons that would explain it. But actually, when you look at it, there's many, many reasons that affect this problem. One of them being funding. Of course, the system was under a lot of stress, and then COVID just made it worse. Yeah. And I think one of the things she said I really liked is that maybe we don't need that much money, but we need to invest it right.
So the solution is more money, but it's obviously important where that money is spent as well.
Yeah, absolutely. One claim that's been repeated for the last 20 years is that Catalonia needs to invest the 6% of its GDP in education. Now, the Catalan education law that was approved in 2009 said that the objective was the 6%, but that's never been reached. Actually, last year was the largest budget on education that the Catalan government approved, and it only allocated 2.5% on education.
Like quite a big difference between 2.5 and 6%.
It is, and though that's 7 billion euros, so it's a lot of money, but still far from the objective.
And we should say as well, it is relevant, I suppose, to point out that Catalonia, like the education is devolved in Spain. It's a devolved power, so the Catalan government has powers over education. We've talked about the education system once, I think, just on the podcast before when we talked specifically about the language immersion model. Why do we speak Catalan in schools? Looking more broadly at the education model and things like that, there are some education experts who kind of question how much weight we place on these OECD guidelines, these PISA tests, Oriol.
Yeah, there are different opinions on this issue, and it's a controversial one. There are those who oppose the OECD guidelines and its recommendations because they say that the OECD is an economic development organization, so it's naturally biased in favor of the economic role of public schools. They also say that preparing young people to get a good job is not the objective, not the main objective of education. Then there's others who are in favor of OECD guidelines.
And the PISA tests.
Exactly. And they say that the results have been so bad precisely because we haven't followed these guidelines properly.
So there's a bit of a debate going on as to what you might say Catalonia's education model. And there's a shift from maybe like a very old school traditional way of teaching to more modern, I suppose, education model, which they call a competency-based model.
Yeah, that's the word.
What does that mean?
It means that we organize academic content according to competencies. So what a student knows and can do, rather than following a more traditional scheme. And I know that definition is very broad. Basically, it makes the student the center of learning. It moves away from traditional exams based on memory, the traditional grading system. You can scrap all that. It's a different and new model, more innovative, one can say. The idea is to learn from real situations to assimilate this knowledge and be able to transfer it to other contexts.
I have to admit, I was struggling a little bit to get my head around this before we recorded, but you actually came up with a nice example. Do you want to share that with us?
Yeah, well, if we were to learn about the Spanish Civil War instead of memorizing what happened, the years, the people that was involved, we could make a play about it. And that would involve creating characters, researching, getting that information. Instead of getting the information, we have to search for it. So we'll learn how to look for information, and then we can apply that to other contexts, other problems when we want to learn different things.
I mean, I get the theory. I mean, that's quite useful in the real world then, isn't it? When we have access with the internet to unlimited information and research skills are obviously, well, in a lot of jobs, how to find out the information is more important than actually knowing the information. So I get it.
But critics say there are less contents. And it's true. The people who advocate for this model defends that the other curriculum had too many contents, so we need to...
So too much content, so basically too much stuff to learn,
Exactly, and then memorizing, spitting it out in the exam, and then forgetting about it. They say this model has two types of content, of knowledge. One of them is essential, and the other one is acquirable. And this is what we were talking about with the play. Essential knowledge that school needs to give you. You need to know when the Civil War happened. But you need to also learn how to research information to then apply it to real life.
And that's what they call acquirable knowledge.
Exactly.
Okay, well, to find out a few more views, you've also been speaking this week with two teachers. Let's have a listen to Xavier Massó and Toni Pedragosa.
The poor PISA results show that something is not quite right in Catalan education, but what? While some say that the competency-based model is not working, others say it is not even being implemented. So what's the reality in classrooms?
Cal fer una reflexió, però no sobrereaccionar davant del que ha passat. No?
Toni Pedragosa, a secondary school teacher and member of the Clam Educatiu platform, says that they believe that society should not overreact to the poor PISA results, but should use them as an opportunity to reflect on our educational model. He says that the PISA tests were bad precisely because they evaluate competencies, and we're still not working in that way. Xavier Massó, a secondary school teacher and Secretary General of the Professors de Secundària Union, thinks otherwise.
Jo entenc que per raó era perfectament previsible, perquè seria per raó...
Xavier blames the poor results precisely on the application of innovative pedagogical formulas, which he says have affected the quality of learning. He mentions project-based learning, which, in his opinion, abandons student effort, knowledge transfer, and memory techniques.
La proscripció de la memòria...
Toni, however, says that Clam Educatiu believes that most secondary school teachers still evaluate students using traditional methods.
Diria el 90% dels docents a l'hora d'avaluar ho
And mentions a 2018 study that indicates that only 10% of schools in Spain are working with a competency-based model, although he admits that there is no clear data on how many classrooms are working on this model now, because he says that profound changes are difficult to implement and that there is a lack of proper guidance and training.
Les dades concretes de quanta gent treballa o avalua per competències no ho tenim.
Xavier, on the other hand, says that the implementation of the new model is more advanced.
S'ha de tornar a pensar el model educatiu.
And he argues for a return to a traditional model based on the transmission of knowledge.
Tornar a ensenyar.
Toni prefers to avoid the dichotomy traditional is good, innovative is bad, or vice versa.
Fugiria de dir lo tradicional és dolent, lo innovador
Clam Educatiu defends that teachers need to evaluate what has worked for them and share their experience with others. He encourages teachers who feel able to work by competencies and projects to do so, but says that if other teachers feel more comfortable with the old methods and it works for them, that's fine too, as long as they follow proper criteria, planning, and check that it really works. In the competency-based model, Xavier says, memory, content, and routines have been abandoned.
Els continguts no serveixen per res.
And those things make students disconnect, he says.
A ningú li pot interessar allò que desconeix.
Toni, on the other hand, believes that delivering a lecture, like teachers used to do, is very simple, and that being an educator is about more than that.
És molt fàcil arribar a fotre una classe magistral i posar-los una feina.
He says that the hard part is teaching students to develop skills that will be useful in their lives, both personally and professionally, and that teaching children to simply pass an exam has little value. So, what do we do to improve?
El sistema educatiu hauria d'equiparar aquestes diferències.
Clam Educatiu believes that teachers should spend more time working together, sharing knowledge and developing strategies, and that we need to help struggling schools and redistribute the most vulnerable students to reduce segregation. Finally, they say teachers need more training and evaluation.
That was Xavier Massó and Toni Pedragosa. Our thanks to the two of them. Oriol, when these PISA results came out on December the 5th, there was a really significant, I would say, political response.
Yeah, it's been on the political agenda for a couple of months, I would say. And even society has been having a huge debate, as we've just seen, even on social media, newspapers, you read about education daily. And that's something that it's not common to read about schools every day, so it's on the agenda.
And the Catalan president even convened a summit of all the political parties, which again is not something that happens often.
No, it doesn't. Pere Aragonès called a summit with all the parties in parliament, and basically they came out with this working group of experts that will draw up a plan and some proposals, and they should be in place on the next academic year.
Yeah, so that was one of the things. They want changes to happen quickly. And I suppose that's one of the points, okay, results, say in these PISA tests, they've gone down since 3 or 4 years ago. But if you make changes in the education system, how long does it actually take for those to be manifested themselves in pupils' learning? Because obviously, if you start in primary school, people are in education until they're 18. So I guess one thing to bear in mind is that changes take a long time to have an effect, I would argue,
Yeah, and that's one of the problems we've found when analyzing the results, is that you cannot look at things that happened 2, 3, 4 years ago. You need to look much further, to look 10, 15, 20 years ago.
So this working group of experts, it has broad support of a big majority of Parliament. And a lot of the parties as well are pushing for this 6% of funding for education in the next budget. We'll also find out about that in the coming weeks. I don't think it's going to jump from 2.5% to 6%, but I do think we will see a bit of an increase, as long as the parties all get together and agree a budget, which is another topic for another day.
In fact, we've already seen a budget increase, not in Catalonia, but in Spain. Last week, Pedro Sánchez promised more funds for the next budget towards a plan to strengthen math and reading in schools. So that means that schools maybe can have additional teachers to have less students per class in maths and reading, so kind of to get better results on those.
Yeah, and just you mentioned maths and reading, and obviously the PISA tests are maths, reading and science, which I get are, very important, obviously viewed the most important subjects, but I guess we shouldn't forget either that there are a lot of other things that get taught in schools as well that aren't really included in these PISA tests. I suppose it's worth pointing out. The debate is set to run and run. It'll be interesting to see what happens, what these experts say. We'll have all of that in the coming weeks on catalannews.com. Time now for our Catalan phrase. What's it this week, Oriol?
Fer mans I mànigues.
Fer mans I mànigues, literally to do hands, or maybe to get hands on. Mànigues, is mànigues sleeves, no?
Yeah,
so to do hands and sleeves.
If we're doing something with your hands, you always pull your sleeves up, as in, I'm going to do something. Great, I'm going to work hard now. So, yeah, that would be it. Really make an effort to get something, really work hard, basically.
So that's what it means. So, yeah, shout out to all the teachers out there who are making a big effort, working hard, and fent mans I mànigues, if that's how you would use it.
Yeah, it also means struggle a little bit.
That's us for today. Thank you very much for listening. You can get in touch with us at fillingthesink@acn.cat. Thanks again to Mònica Nadal, to Xavier Massó, and to Toni Pedragosa. Thanks to you, Oriol.
And thanks to you, Lorcan. It's great to have you back.
We're back again next weekend with another episode of Filling the Sink. That one on the amazing things happening up at Girona FC. Until then, for me, Lorcan Doherty, and all of us here at Catalan News, bye for now. Adeu.